Welcome to our second in a series of videos of how to operate the DryerMaster DM510. If you missed the first video, there's a link below. In the first video, we looked at the very basics of running the DryerMaster. In this video, we're going to look at a few more features or ways that you can get the most out of your DryerMaster. Okay, so let's start with what we call control limits. So this is the way for the operator to be able to tell the DryerMaster the range of speeds it's allowed to operate in. So remember, in automatic mode, the DryerMaster automatically controls the discharge rate to get to the moisture level you're looking for, the average moisture level. Okay, so what you can do here is you can say to the DryerMaster, look, you're only allowed to run between these speed levels. Okay, it's especially important if you've got restrictions on your system. For example, if you've got a dry leg that can only take 2,000 bushels an hour, you don't want to let the DryerMaster run at 3,000 bushels an hour. Okay, so it's a way for you to set limits that the DryerMaster can operate within. Okay, so we'll take a look how to get there. So we basically hit the settings key down at the bottom left, and we choose number 1 for supervisor setup. The password is very simple. It's just 123, and then enter. And then it's number 1 for control limits, so you can just hit enter again. Okay, so we've got 5 settings here. We're only going to talk about the first 4. So the first 2 are maximum discharge rate in auto and minimum discharge rate in auto. Like I said, the operator can set those to whatever they feel comfortable with. We have some operators who basically start and just set it up to the limits of their system, and they leave it like that. We have other operators who will change those during the season. For example, at the beginning of the season, if the grain is quite wet, they might set the limits lower, and when it's drier, they might set the limits higher. Okay, that's totally up to the operator, and this is something you can adjust during the season. The next 2 settings are important because they tell the DryerMaster when the dryer is off. And we want the DryerMaster to know when it's off, because when the dryer is off, it doesn't do any more calculations. It's not updating its model. So the 2 settings are pretty standard. You rarely have to change them. But we've got dryer discharge off rate, and we want that to not be 0. And it should be high enough that when you turn off the dryer and go back to the main screen, the dryer shows off for rate. Okay, but obviously it has to be less than the minimum discharge rate. And the second one there is the burner off temperature. And we usually set that about 30 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit below what you dry at. And again, once you turn off the dryer, the temperature inside the dryer will go down. And once it goes below that number, then the DryerMaster knows it's off. Okay, but you've always got to set it above ambient, because if it's not above ambient, it'll never go below ambient. Okay, so those are the settings, and each product you need to set those up for, because obviously with different products you might run at different speeds and you would run at different burner temperatures. Okay, so let's look. If you were paying attention, you would notice one little thing. If you were watching the first video, I talked about there being 3 modes. There was local, where you set the discharge rate from the dryer; manual, where the operator can set the discharge rate from the DryerMaster panel; and auto, when the DryerMaster will automatically change the discharge rate. Okay, if you notice here, there's auto first load. Okay, that's a new one. So let's talk a little bit about where auto first load comes from and how we use that. Okay, so you dried yesterday and your dryer is full of grain, and you're going to start up in the morning. And the question is, you've got this whole dryer here full of grain. Do you have any idea what the moistures are at the different levels in that dryer? Well, we might have known roughly what they were yesterday, but something could have happened overnight, and we've got to reheat the dryer and we're going to reheat the grain, so we really don't know what the moistures are. So because we don't have a good idea, and the DryerMaster doesn't have a good idea because it doesn't know what happened last night, what we do for the first dryer load with DryerMaster is we don't look at what's coming out of the dryer. We only look what's coming into the dryer for the first dryer load, and we use the drying model from the day before. So it's just going to assume that the drying conditions were like they were the day before, and that's probably the best assumption to make in almost all cases. Okay, the only exception would be if yesterday was 90 degrees and sunny, and today is 50 degrees and raining. The dryer is probably not going to dry anywhere close to how it did the day before. In that case, for the first dryer load or so, you would probably want to run in manual because for that case, you might know more than the dryer master does. But other than that, what happens is once that first kernel from drying that day gets from the inlet sensor down to the outlet sensor, then the dryer master has good information for today. It knows how the dryer is drying today, and then it starts to update its model. Okay, so that's what auto first load. After the first load is done, that will disappear and you'll just be into auto. Okay, so once it disappears, you know that that first dryer load has gone through. Another question we get a lot is how do we pick a moisture set point? I mean, what is a moisture set point? Well, traditionally a lot of people have looked at a moisture set point as I don't want anything over, for example, 15%. I don't want any moisture over 15% going into my bin. And that's fine, but one thing will happen is if your maximum is 15, there's no way you're going to get an average of 15, okay? Because everything's going to basically be below 15. With the dryer master, we use the word average. So I want the average moisture to be 15%. So when you're setting your set point, realize you're setting for an average. And to get an average, you have to have half over and half under. And that's the only way we're going to get an average. So you can see here, I mean, there's going to be some moisture over your set point, and there's going to be some moisture under, but over the drying run, you're basically going to be looking at an average. And if you can keep things pretty close, once it goes to the bin, you're not going to really be able to see those bumps anymore. Okay, so important to think about things as an average, and if you see some moisture coming out that's over target, then that's normal because it'll probably be balanced out over the day. Okay. The other advantage with Dryer Master over if you're just doing samples is because you have the continuous real-time information. If there is, for some reason, some really wet grain that goes through, you're going to know it's there because you'll have seen it go through the Dryer Master, and if you want to do something about it, you'll at least know it's there and you can do something about it in the bin. Now, the one thing grain drying will teach you is patience. We live in a world of video games where you push a button and things happen. That's not how things work with drying. Okay, so one of the things, a little trick or a little tool that I use is to calculate basically your time in the dryer. Always be thinking about how long is that grain in the dryer. And why is that important? Well, if I know that if the grain's going to be in there for 2 hours, it means if I make a change to the discharge rate, it's going to be a full 2 hours before I see the full impact of that change. You know, if I make a change in the discharge rate, for example, whatever's in the cooling zone of the dryer, that's already done. There's nothing I can do to impact that. And even the stuff in the middle of the dryer, if I change the discharge rate, is not going to see the full impact. It's going to take a full dryer load to see the full impact. So how do we calculate that number? Really quite simple. I'll just give you a little trick. We press the settings key, and this time we do number 2 for installer setup. And the password is 4628. It's just like you're making a plus sign with your finger. And then enter. And then we're going to go to number 3, dryer volumes and throughput. Okay. And the 4th number down there is the throughput number. In this case, it's 50. Okay. And what that means is basically that's the time it takes to empty your dryer in 1 hour. Okay, but what it means isn't that important. The fact that it's 50 is. And if you remember, we were running at a speed of 25. So if the throughput is 50 and the speed is 25, you do 50 divided by 25, and that means at a speed of 25, you're 2 hours in the dryer. Now, if you were running at a speed of 20, then it would be 50 divided by 20, which would be 2.5 hours. So if you have that throughput number, you can always just take that number and then divide into it the speed that you're running at, and that gives you a pretty good idea of how long the product is going to be in the dryer at that speed. Okay, now, way back in the first video, we talked a little bit about alarms, and we have those alarm notifications up here, and the fact that you can set DM Mobile up to send you a text on an alarm. Well, let's look at how you set the alarm levels, okay? So it's very simple. There's an alarms key here. We press that one, and then we get set alarm limits. Press that, and then basically you've got 6 different parameters you can set alarm limits for. You have inlet moisture, outlet moisture, drying temperature, discharge rate, inlet temperature, outlet temperature. Okay, so all of those will have a high and a low, and they'll have a critical and a warning. And kind of the way to think about it is, a warning is, I want to know that happened. And a critical is, oops, something has gone wrong. This is really important. We should do something. Okay, if you think in general terms what those are, and we'll do an example. We'll just go through discharge rate. And you can see here that basically we have a critical high. These are set way out of bounds, so you need to set them yourself. So you should go through for each of those settings for each product. You want to go through and set the alarm. So remember, the warning is, I want to know something. So if your system is, you've set your maximum rate, for example, at 2,000 bushels an hour, then as it gets close to that, you probably want to know that. And then when it gets there, then you basically, you know something might have happened that you don't want to happen. Okay, so we can put a critical and warning, and you have high and low. Same on the warning low, warning high. Also important if you're doing it for moistures, and we'll show that in a second. So we can put some limits in here for discharge rate. Put critical high, warning high, and then warning low and critical low. And like I said, you go through each of them and set those. And this is a tool for you to use. Some operators will set them really wide and they don't really want to be notified that much. And other operators will set them really tight. It's really personal preference. And here, for example, we can look at inlet moisture alarm. So what's the inlet moisture? And again, it's a way for you to have a tool that you can use. And those settings obviously will also be usable if they get triggered. That's how you can set up on DM Mobile that you get a notification if they get triggered. Okay, a couple of tips on calibration. And we talked about calibration in the last video a little bit. I want to add one or two more things. Basically, we recommend that for the first dryer load or hour that you're drying, don't do calibrations. There's a reason for that. So we looked at that picture before of the dryer sitting there with all that grain overnight. Well, what's happened to the kernels is they've cooled down. The moisture gradient in the kernel is different. The temperature gradient in the kernel is different than the day before. Dryer Master is measuring the amount of water, and water behaves differently at different temperatures. So to get good match on calibration, we want the kernel to be kind of in the same condition it was in yesterday when we were calibrating. So basically, you want that grain to be warmed up again before you start doing calibrations. If you do it right away when you first start up, you're going to end up calibrating one way and then calibrating back another way once the grain is warmed up. So best for the first, at least for the first hour, if not the first dryer load, don't do calibrations. They're really not going to do you much good. Second thing, it's better to do a few good calibrations like we talked to, where you're doing 3 tests and taking an average, rather than just taking a quick cup, run it in, and do that quite often. That's going to give you a better chance of, if you do the good calibrations, you'll have less likelihood of rogue readings. Whereas you're just taking a little scoop and testing it, you never know what you can get because there's always variation in the grain. Okay, that's why, like I said, you can see a range of values in the tests that you sample, and that gives you an idea that there actually is variability in the grain coming out of the dryer. And the last thing, real simple, always check that the grain is flowing past the sensor when you do a sample. It only takes a second or two. Just make sure that there is grain flow. Okay. If you're not at the Dryer Master and you want to look what's happened, you can use DM Mobile if you have it and go into the history function and you'll get the 10-minute averages. You can also see them here. All you have to do is hit the view button here. And you get the history, and you can use your up and down arrows to scroll back. These are 10-minute averages, and you can scroll back a long way. So if you're not there, you don't have to be there to see everything. You can just scroll back and you'll see the 10-minute averages. Okay. Now, way back in the first one, I also talked about making sure that a product has been set up. There's a real simple way to know if a product has been set up. So you're going to dry a new product. You're going, I can't remember if we set that up 2 years ago when we set the Dryer Master up. Okay, real simple. We hit the settings key. You make sure you're in the product you want to be in first. Settings key. then installer setup 4628 and enter. And we do number 3, dryer volumes and throughput. And what we see here are the default values. So if you see hot zone 2000, cold zone 1000, throughput rate 50, it probably has not been set up because those are default values. Okay, so it's very likely that your dryer is going to be different than that. If you see those numbers and you still want to set up that product and you don't know how to do that, you just call us the support center. It'll take us 2-3 minutes to walk you through basically how to set that up. Okay. And let's see, there is a video we also have on DM Mobile, and we'll put a link down below as well. You can set DM Mobile up to send you a text on alarm, as we mentioned before. And the way to do that is when you're in DM Mobile, you go to the little hamburger icon, pick the Preferences tab. Okay, and you'll get to this page, and where it says mobile numbers, this is where you put your mobile number. You can have up to 3 people can get a text on an alarm, so you can put 3 different numbers in. Just use this format, so it's a +1, which is a country code, the area code, and then your number. Put the 3 in. Come down to the bottom where it says text alarms, and you want to put in a number. It says never as the default, so you don't want never. So you basically, probably 5 minutes is good, where an alarm can happen, and if nobody's there to hit cancel on the alarm and acknowledge it, after 5 minutes it sends you the text. And then there's other settings. You can wait longer if you want or less. And then basically don't forget at the bottom right, you got to hit the save button. If you don't hit the save button, all that information gets lost and you have to go re-enter it again. And the last thing I want to talk about, and this, you're going to see this if you have DM Mobile on your dashboard. And this is a graph of a simulation we run in the office, and it's taken off of DM Mobile. And I just want to show you a kind of a different way of looking at drying, because you can look at the screen on Dryer Master or your paper records, but when you look at drying like this, it's a little bit different. So this is simulation, like I said, runs very extreme levels. So the green here is your inlet moisture, your blue is your outlet moisture, your black is your set point, and the gold here is the discharge rate that the Dryer Master is adjusting in automatic. Okay, up here we're 30% here, and we drop it to 20%, which nobody's going to do. But we're going to look at what the Dryer Master does, just to give you an idea of kind of how the control works. So the Dryer Master sees that drop, okay, and we come right down here to the rate at that time, and then it starts increasing the rate, right? Because the grain's going to be coming in drier, we got to go faster. But it doesn't do it all at once, okay? It just gradually does it. So as that dry grain, as the dry grain is coming in, it's got to start speeding up. But if it speeds up too much, the wet grain that's underneath is going to come out really wet. So, something like that, there's no way everything's going to come out at your set point. So what the Dryer Master does is it's going to get some of the wet grain is going to be under dried, and some of the dry grain is going to be over dried. But if you can see, basically over and under, you're basically going to average out. So, once it goes into the bin, it blends and or tempers, and then basically you should be able to get your average. And as we look through here, this is basically the same thing the whole way through. Here we see the moisture is going up and the Dryer Master gradually slowing down, and we're a little over, a little under. And if you look at the whole thing, this is like a 24-hour period. Basically the average is going to be very close to your set point. Again, you're going to have some over, you're going to have some under, but if you can keep that average right, that's where you're going to be able to be close to your set point. You reduce the amount of shrink you have, and that's where you can make some money. Okay. And like I said, take a look at this. It's a different way of looking at drying, because you're looking at it over a longer period, not just minute to minute as you see the moistures coming out of the dryer. Okay, that's about it for this video. Like I said, there's links down below to the first video and to the DM Mobile video as well. If you have any questions at all on any of this, please give us a call at the Dryer Master Support Center, and it's a toll-free number, 1-888-318-0009. Thank you very much for watching.